Long Exile by Leo Tolstoy. Once upon a time there lived in the city of Vladimir a young tradesman named Askanov. He had 2 shops and a house. Askanov had a ruddy complexion and curly hair. He was a very jolly fellow and a good singer. When he was young he used to drink too much, and when he was tipsy he was turbulent. But after his marriage he ceased drinking and occasionally had a spree. One summer Askanov was going to Nizhny to the great fair. As he was about to bid his family good-bye, his wife said to him, "Ivan Dmitrievitch, do not start today. I dreamed that some misfortune befell you." In Russia sometimes people go by different names, and so Askanov also, his formal name is Ivan Dmitrievitch. Continuing on, Askanov laughed at her and said, "Are you still afraid that I shall go on a spree at the fair?" His wife said, "I myself know not what I'm afraid of, but I had such a bad dream. You seemed to be coming home from town, and you took off your hat, and I looked, and your head was all gray." Askanov laughed. "That means good luck. See, I am going now, and I will bring you some rich remembrances." And he bade his family farewell and set off. Let's stop and answer number 1 on the study guide. Why does Askanov's wife beg him not to go to the fair? Okay, let's go ahead and continue on. Again, as he bade his family farewell and set off. When he had gone half his journey, he fell in with a tradesman who was an acquaintance of his, and the two stopped at the same tavern for the night. They took tea together and went to sleep in adjoining rooms. Askanov did not care to sleep long. He awoke in the middle of the night, and in order that he might get a good start while it was cool, he aroused his driver and bade him harness up, went down into the smoky hut, settled his account with the landlord, and started on his way. After he had driven 40 versts, he again stopped to get something to eat. He rested in the vestibule of the inn, and when it was noon, he went to the doorstep and ordered the samovar got ready. Then he took out his guitar and began to play. Suddenly a troika with a bell dashed up to the inn, and from the equipage leaped an official with 2 soldiers. He came directly up to Askanov and asked, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" Askanov answered without hesitation, and asked him if he would not like to have a glass of tea with him. But the official kept on with his questions. "Where did you spend last night? Were you alone or with a merchant? Have you seen the merchant this morning? Why did you leave so early this morning?" Askanov wondered why he was questioned so closely, but he told everything just as it was, and asked, "Why do you put so many questions to me? I am not a thief or a murderer. I am on my own business. There is nothing to question me about." Then the official called up the soldiers and said, "I am the police inspector, and I have made these inquiries of you because the merchant with whom you spent last night has been stabbed. Show me your things, and you men search him." They went into the tavern, brought in the trunk and bag, and began to open and search them. Suddenly the police inspector pulled out from the bag a knife and demanded, "Whose knife is this?" Askanov looked and saw a knife covered with blood taken from his bag, and he was frightened. "And whose blood is that on the knife?" Askanov tried to answer, but he could not articulate his words. I don't know. That knife, it is not mine." Then the police inspector said, "This morning the merchant was found stabbed to death in his bed. No one except you could have done it. The tavern was locked on the inside, and there was no one in the tavern except yourself. And here is the bloody knife in your bag, and your guilt is evident in your face. Tell me how you killed him, and how much money you took from him." Askanov swore that he had not done it, that he had not seen the merchant after he had drunk tea with him, that the only money that he had with him, 8,000 rubles, was his own, and that the knife was not his. But his voice trembled, and his face was pale, and he was all quivering with fright, like a guilty person. The police inspector called the soldiers and commanded him to bind Askanov and take him to the wagon. When they took him to the wagon with his feet tied, Askanov crossed himself and burst into tears. They confiscated Askanov's things and his money and took him to the next city and threw him into prison. They sent Vladimir to make inquiries about Askanov's character, and all the merchants and citizens of Vladimir declared that Askanov, when he was young, used to drink and was wild, but that now he was a worthy man. Then he was brought up for judgment. Let's go ahead and stop for a minute and answer some of the study guide questions. Number 2 on the study guide said, what does the police inspector accuse Askinoff of? You can go ahead and pause this audio as you record your answer. Again, what does the police inspector accuse Askinoff of? Number 3, what evidence do the police have in their case against Askinoff? All right. So whenever you're ready, you can resume the audio, and we'll pick up on page 807 at the very beginning. He was sentenced for having killed the merchant and for having robbed him of 20,000 rubles. Askinoff's wife was dumbfounded by the event and did not know what to think. Her children were still small, and there was one at the breast. She took them all with her and journeyed to the city where her husband was in prison. At first, they would not grant her admittance, but afterwards she got permission from the Nachaliks and was taken to her husband. When she saw him in the prison garb and chains together with murderers, she fell to the floor, and it was a long time before she recovered from her swoon. Then she placed her children around her, sat down amid them, and began to tell him about their domestic affairs and to ask him about anything that had happened to him, or everything. He told her the whole story, and she asked, "What is to be done now?" And he said, "We must petition the Tsar. It is impossible that an innocent man should be condemned." The wife said that she had already sent in the petition to the Tsar, but the petition had not been granted. Askinoff said nothing, but was evidently very much downcast. Then his wife said, You see the dream I had when I dreamed that you had become gray-haired meant something after all. Already your hair has begun to turn gray with trouble. You ought to have stayed at home that time." And she began to tear her hair, and she said, "Vanya, my dear husband, tell your wife the truth. Did you commit the crime?" And Askinoff said, "So you too have no faith in me." And he wrung his hands and he wept. Then a soldier came and said that it was time for the wife and children to go, and Askinoff for the last time bade his family farewell. All right, let's go ahead and stop for a moment and answer some of the questions on the study guide. Number 5, ask, after his wife's visit, what are Askinoff's thoughts and feelings about the situation? So let's go ahead and continue on. We actually can't answer that yet. We'll read a little bit more at the beginning of page 808. When his wife was gone, Askinoff began to think over all that they had said. When he remembered that his wife had also distrusted him and had asked him if he had murdered the merchant, he said to himself, "It is evident that no one but God can know the truth of the matter, and he is the only one to ask for mercy, and he is the only one from whom to expect." And from that time Askinoff ceased to send in petitions, ceased to hope, and only prayed to God. Askinoff was sentenced to be knouted, and then to exile with hard labor. And so it was done. He was flogged with the knout, and then when the wounds from the knout were healed, he was sent with other exiles to Siberia. Keep in mind from our research that Siberia is on the outskirts of Russia. It's like a desert type of area where they have prisons and they work the prisoners extremely hard, perhaps in mines and things like that. All right, continuing on. Askinoff lived 26 years in the mines. The hair on his head had become white as snow, and his beard had grown long, thin, and gray. All his gaiety had vanished, and he was bent his gait was slow. He spoke little, he never laughed, and he spent much of his time in prayer. Askinoff had learned while in prison to make boots, and with the money that he earned he bought the Book of Martyrs, and used to read it when it was light enough in prison, and on holidays he would go to the prison church, read the Gospels, and sing in the choir, for his voice was still strong and good. The authorities liked Askinoff for his submissiveness, and his prison associates respected him and called him grandfather and the man of God. Whenever they had petitions to be presented, Askinoff was always chosen to carry them to the authorities, and when quarrels arose among the prisoners, they always came to Askinoff as umpire. Askinoff never received any letters from home, and he knew not whether his wife and children were alive. One time some new convicts came to the prison. In the evening all the old convicts gathered around the newcomers and began to ply them with questions as to the cities and villages from which this one or that one had come, and what their crimes were. At this time Askinoff was also sitting on his bunk near the strangers, and with bowed head was listening to what was said. One of the new convicts was a tall, healthy-looking old man of 60 years with a close-cropped gray beard. He was telling why he had been arrested, and he said, And so, brothers, I was sent here for nothing. I unharnessed a horse from a postboy's sledge, and they caught me with it. And I insisted that I was stealing it. But I said I only wanted to go on a little faster. So I whipped up the horse, and besides, the driver was a friend of mine. It's all right, I said. No, they said, you were stealing it. But they did not know what and where I had stolen. I had done things which long ago would have sent me here, but I was not found out, and now they have sent me here without any justice in it. But what's the use of grumbling? I have been in Siberia before. They did not keep me here very long, though. Now, in that particular paragraph, there's some irony there because he says, why did they send me here? I didn't do anything. But he obviously was stealing the horse. Anyway, continuing on. Where did you come from? Asked one of the convicts. Well, we came from the city of Vladimir. We are citizens of that place. My name is Makar, and my father's name was Semyon. Askanov raised his head and asked, tell me, Semyonovitch, have you ever heard of the Askanovs, merchants in Vladimir City? Are they alive? Ha ha, indeed I have heard of them. They are rich merchants, though their father is in Siberia. It seems he was just like any of the rest of us sinners. And now tell me, grandfather, what were you sent here for? Askanov did not like to speak of his misfortunes. He sighed and said, 26 years ago I was condemned to hard labor on account of my sins. Makar Semyonov said, but what was your crime? Askanov replied, so I must have deserved this. So keep in mind, Askanov, he accepted that he was sent there for his sins, but he didn't say that he was guilty of murder. At this point, Askanov had just kind of rationalized the fact that he maybe had been bad in his earlier years, and so this ended up being his punishment. So continue reading on page 809. But he would not give any further particulars, and the other convicts, however, related why Askanov had been sent to Siberia. They told how on the road someone had killed the merchant and put the knife into Askanov's luggage, and how he had been unjustly punished for this. When Makar heard this, he glanced at Askanov, slapped himself on the knees, and said, well, now, this is wonderful. This is really wonderful. You've been growing old, grandfather. They began to ask him what he thought was wonderful and where he had seen Askanov, but Makar did not answer. He only repeated, "Ha, miracle, boys! How wonderful that we should meet again here!" And when he said these words, it came over Askanov that perhaps this man might know who had killed the merchant, and he said, "Did you ever hear of that crime, Semyonovitch? Or did you ever see me before?" "Of course I heard of it. The country was full of it. But it happened a long time ago, and I have forgotten what I heard," said Makar. "Perhaps you heard who killed the merchant?" asked Askanov. Makar laughed and said, "Why, of course the man who had the knife in his bag killed him. It would have been impossible for anyone to put the knife in your things and not have been caught doing it. For how could the knife have been put into your bag? Was it not standing close by your head? And you would have heard it, wouldn't you?" As soon as Askanov heard these words, he felt convinced that this was the very man who had killed the tradesman. Well, because, he mentioned that the bag was near his head. Who else would know those details? He stood up and walked away, and all that night he was unable to sleep. Deep melancholy came upon him, and he began to call back the past in his imagination. He imagined his wife as she had been when for the last time she had accompanied him to the fair. She seemed to stand before him exactly as if she were alive, and he saw her face and her eyes, and he seemed to hear her words and laugh. Then his imagination brought up his children before him, one a boy in a little fur coat, and the other at her mother's breast. And he imagined himself as he was at that time, young and happy. He remembered how he had sat on the top of the steps of the tavern when they arrested him, and how he had played on his guitar, and how his soul was full of joy at that time. And he remembered the place of execution where they had flogged him, and the executioner and the people standing around, and the chains and the convicts, and all his 26 years of prison life, and he remembered his old age. And such melancholy came upon Askanov that he was tempted to put an end to himself. "And all on account of this criminal," said Askanov to himself. And then he began to feel such anger against Makar Semyonov that he almost lost himself, and was crazy with desire to pay off the load of vengeance. He repeated prayers all night, but could not recover his calm. When day came, he walked by Makar and did not look at him. Thus passed 2 weeks. At night Askanov was not able to sleep, and such melancholy had come over him that he did not know what to do. One time during the night, as he happened to be passing through the prison, he saw that the soil was disturbed under one of the bunks. He stopped to examine it, and suddenly Makar crept from under the bunk and looked at Askanov with a terrible face. Askanov was about to pass on so as not to see him, but Makar seized his arm and told him how he had been digging a passage under the wall, and how every day he carried the dirt out in his bootlegs and emptied it in the street when he went to work. And he said, "If you only keep quiet, old man, I will get you out too. But if you tell on me, they will flog me, but afterward I will make it hot for you. I will kill you." When Askanov saw the man who had injured him, he trembled all over with rage, twitched away his arm, and said, "I have no reason to make my escape, and to kill me would do no harm. You killed me long ago, but as to telling on you or not, I shall do as God sees fit to have me." So let's stop here and take a look at any study guide questions we can answer now. Number 6, ask how many years did Askanov work in the mines? So go back through and get the answer to that question and pause the audio if you need to. Number 7, while Askanov was in prison, what type of person did he become? So look back and reflect on how others thought of him and even how the authorities or the guards thought of him. Why is Askanov so angry at Makar? And we just read that. And finally, number 9, what does Askanov mean when he says that Makar killed him long ago? All right, at this time, I'm going to stop the audio. You guys need to finish reading the story on your own, and when you're done, you need to finish answering study guide questions 10 through 16.